I remember the exact moment when I realized my daughter no longer saw me as a person with feelings. Just a wallet with limitations, a burden to be managed, an old-fashioned relic who didn't understand the real cost of living these days. It was at my granddaughter Emma's 16th birthday party, a lavish affair in my daughter Sarah's backyard, complete with a hired DJ, a photo booth, and catering that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, could you grab the paper plates from the pantry? Sarah called over the pulsing music. The caterer says we're running low. I set down my glass of lemonade and made my way through clusters of chattering teenagers to the house. In the kitchen, I found Sarah and her husband Mark huddled with their friends, wine glasses in hand. And then, Mom shows up with this $30 bracelet for Emma, Sarah was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the granite island that separated us. I mean, what is Emma supposed to do with that? It probably came from one of those discount stores she's always browsing. You'd think she could splurge a little for her only granddaughter's sweet 16. Mark laughed. Well, you know how she is, always pinching pennies. I swear, sometimes I think she's just being cheap on purpose, Sarah continued, oblivious to my presence. Dad left her comfortably set up. There's no reason for her to live like she's one step away from a retirement home. I stood frozen in the doorway, paper plates forgotten, as the conversation shifted to other topics. I had indeed given Emma a bracelet that afternoon, a delicate silver chain with a small sapphire pendant that matched my granddaughter's eyes. It had cost significantly more than $30, but that wasn't what stung. It was the casual dismissal, the assumption that my gift, chosen with love and care, was somehow a reflection of stinginess rather than thoughtfulness. What Sarah didn't know, what I had deliberately kept from her, was that the penny pinching she mocked had a purpose. For the past 10 years, I had been quietly setting aside a substantial portion of my income and savings into college funds for Emma and her younger brother Jack. Every month, without fail, I transferred money into those accounts, watching them grow steadily toward the future education of my grandchildren. I lived modestly not out of miserliness, but because I had different priorities than designer handbags and luxury vacations. But standing there in my daughter's gleaming kitchen, listening to her laugh about my supposed cheapness with her equally well-heeled friends, something inside me shifted. A quiet, slow-burning anger began to rise, not just at being misunderstood, but at being unseen. I am Eleanor Wilson, 68 years old, a retired high school English teacher with a pension, Social Security, and the life insurance policy left by my late husband, James. I have one daughter, Sarah, who married a successful real estate developer and lives in a house 3 times the size of the one she grew up in. I have 2 grandchildren, whom I adore. And I was suddenly very, very tired of being treated like a quaint, slightly embarrassing relic. I backed away from the kitchen doorway before Sarah could spot me, then made a show of entering loudly, calling out, "Where did you say those plates were, honey?" The conversation around the island immediately shifted. Glasses were topped off, smiles fixed in place. I played along, retrieving the plates, returning to the party, and watching Emma unwrap extravagant gift after extravagant gift, designer clothes, the latest smartphone, concert tickets. When she opened my small box containing the bracelet, there was a momentary pause, a flicker of genuine pleasure in her eyes before she glanced at her mother. "Thanks, Grandma," she said dutifully, before quickly moving on to the next, larger package. That night, I drove home to my modest 3-bedroom ranch house, the same one Sarah had grown up in, and sat in my darkened living room for a long time. On the mantelpiece were photographs chronicling my family's history. James and me on our wedding day. Sarah as a gap-toothed first grader. James holding newborn Emma, while Sarah looked on exhaustedly from her hospital bed. Jack's kindergarten, graduation, the four of us, Sarah, Mark, Emma, and Jack, on their trip to the Grand Canyon last year. I hadn't been invited on that trip. "It's really more of a parents with kids thing, Mom," Sarah had explained. When exactly had I become an outsider in my own family? And more importantly, why had I accepted it so quietly? James had been gone for 12 years now. A sudden heart attack at 60 had taken him without warning, leaving me to navigate widowhood just as Sarah was entering her 30s and establishing her own family. James had been the buffer between us, the mediator who smoothed Sarah's sharp edges and reminded me not to take her critical nature personally. "She's just like you were at that age," he'd say with a wink. "Remember how you used to lecture your mother about her outdated curtains and how embarrassing they were when your friends came over?" He'd been right, of course. I had been judgmental of my own mother, convinced I knew better, impatient with her old-fashioned ways. But I'd grown out of it, had come to appreciate my mother's wisdom before she passed. I'd assumed Sarah would undergo a similar maturation, especially after becoming a mother herself. Instead, her critical tendencies had only intensified, sharpened by the wealth and status she'd acquired through her marriage to Mark. I picked up my phone and pulled up the most recent statements for Emma and Jack's college funds. Emma's, which had been growing longer, now contained just over $87,000. Jack's was catching up quickly at $62,000. I had planned to continue contributing until they were ready for college, then surprise both my grandchildren and their parents with this gift. I had imagined the moment. The shock on Sarah's face, the gratitude, the recognition that perhaps her mother wasn't the tight-fisted old woman she assumed. But now, staring at those numbers in the darkness of my living room, I wondered if I was being naive. Would Sarah see this as a generous, loving gesture from a devoted grandmother? Or would she simply take it as her due, further evidence that I had money I should have been spending all along? The next morning, I made an appointment with my financial advisor, Michael, who had been managing my investments since James died. "What can I do for you today, Eleanor?" he asked as I settled into the chair across from his desk. Michael was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He had known James and me for over 20 years, had helped us plan for retirement, had guided me through the financial aspects of widowhood with patience and clarity. "I'd like to make some changes to my estate plan," I said, "specifically to the college funds for Emma and Jack." Michael nodded, pulling up the relevant information on his computer. "Those accounts have been performing quite well. Both are on track to provide substantial support for their education." "I'm considering adding some conditions," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Michael's eyebrows rose slightly. "What kind of conditions did you have in mind?" I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. "I want the funds to remain in my control until the children actually begin college. And I'd like to add stipulations about how the money can be used, for tuition, books, housing, meal plans, but not for, say, spring break trips or new cars." Michael studied me for a moment. "That's certainly doable, but may I ask what prompted this? You've been consistently contributing to these funds for years without any such restrictions." I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Sarah doesn't know about these accounts. She's under the impression that I paused, searching for the right word. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Frugal to a fault, that I'm hoarding my money or spending it unwisely. Last night, I overheard her mocking a birthday gift I gave Emma, calling me cheap. Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. "And you're concerned that if Sarah learns about these funds, I'm concerned that she'll feel entitled to them or to direct how they're used," I finished. "I want to ensure that this money goes directly to my grandchildren's education, as I've always intended. not to be redirected to home renovations, or vacations, or whatever else Sarah and Mark might deem more important in the moment. Michael nodded slowly. We can definitely structure the accounts that way. In fact, we could convert them to 529 plans, which would have tax advantages and built-in restrictions for educational expenses. That sounds perfect, I said. As Michael outlined the changes and began preparing the necessary paperwork, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and resolve. This wasn't how I had imagined this gift unfolding, but perhaps it was necessary to protect both the gift itself and my relationship with my family. There's one more thing, I added as Michael handed me forms to sign. I'd like to explore options for me to move into a smaller place. You're thinking of selling your house? Michael seemed surprised. It's nearly paid off, and the property values in your neighborhood have increased significantly. Exactly, I said. I've been rattling around in that big house by myself for years now. It's more space than I need, and the maintenance is becoming a burden. I think it's time for something simpler, something that better fits my life now. What I didn't articulate, what I was only beginning to acknowledge to myself, was that I also wanted to reclaim some measure of control over my own narrative. Sarah saw me as clinging to an outdated lifestyle out of stubbornness or frugality. Perhaps it was time to show her and everyone else that I was capable of change, of growth, of making choices that reflected my own desires rather than others' expectations. The following weekend, I began the process of decluttering my house, starting with James's study. It had remained largely untouched since his death, preserved like a museum exhibit of my late husband's life. His medical journals still lined the bookshelves. His desk calendar still displayed the month of his passing. His reading glasses still rested beside the leather armchair where he would sit in the evenings. I worked methodically, sorting items into categories: keep, donate, give to family, discard. It was emotionally exhausting work, each object carrying memories and attachments. But it was also unexpectedly liberating. As the space gradually transformed from shrine to simply another room, I felt something looser and lighter taking root in my chest. I was carefully packing James's collection of vintage fountain pens, which I planned to give to Jack when he was older, when the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I glimpsed Sarah's SUV in the driveway. "Mom?" she called, letting herself in with the key she rarely used. "Are you home?" "In the study," I replied, continuing with my task. Sarah appeared in the doorway, elegant in slim jeans and a cashmere sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a smooth ponytail. She looked around the half-emptied room with evident surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked, a note of alarm in her voice. "Cleaning out," I said simply. "It's long overdue." She stepped further into the room, picking up a medical textbook from a box marked "Donate." "You're getting rid of Dad's things?" "Not all of them," I explained. "I'm keeping what's meaningful, finding good homes for the rest." Sarah set the book down, frowning slightly. "Why now, all of a sudden?" I met her gaze steadily. "Because it's time. I'm thinking of selling the house." "Selling?" She broke off, shock evident on her face. "Mom, this is our family home. You can't just sell it." "It was our family home," I corrected gently. "Now it's just my home, and it's more than I need." Sarah crossed her arms, her expression shifting from surprise to something harder. "Is this about money? Because if you're struggling, Mark and I can help. There's no need to make drastic decisions." The assumption stung, but I kept my voice level. "I'm not struggling financially, Sarah. I simply want to change. Something smaller, easier to maintain, perhaps closer to downtown where I can walk to shops and restaurants." "Downtown?" She looked at me as if I'd suggested moving to Mars. "But there's nothing but those overpriced condos and apartments for people in their 20s. You wouldn't fit in there." "I don't need to fit in," I said, unable to keep a hint of sharpness from my tone. I need to live somewhere that makes sense for me now, not for the family we were 20 years ago. Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying me with a puzzled expression. What's going on with you, Mom? First, that strange comment at Emma's party about your gift being more expensive than it looked. Now this. She gestured around the study. It's not like you to be so impulsive. I almost laughed at the irony. Considering selling a house I'd lived in for 35 years after 12 years of widowhood was hardly impulsive, but I recognized the futility of pointing this out. I'm not being impulsive, I said instead. I'm making decisions that reflect my current life rather than holding on to the past. It's called moving forward. Sarah's frown deepened. And what about Emma and Jack? They love coming to Grandma's house. This is the only place they've ever known you? The guilt tactic was familiar and, I had to admit, effective. I did worry about disrupting my grandchildren's sense of continuity, of history. But then I remembered Emma's quick dismissal of my carefully chosen gift, the way she had looked to her mother for cues about how to respond. Emma and Jack can visit me wherever I live, I said firmly. They're old enough to understand that people's lives change, and it might be good for them to see their grandmother embracing new experiences rather than just existing in a museum of memories. Sarah's face flushed slightly. That's a little dramatic, don't you think? Nobody's asking you to live in a museum, but there's something to be said for stability, for respecting family history. I do respect our family history, I countered. That's why I'm carefully sorting through everything, making sure special items go to the right people. But respect doesn't mean stagnation, Sarah. She seemed about to argue further, then apparently thought better of it. With visible effort, she softened her approach. Look, Mom, I didn't come over to fight. I actually wanted to invite you to dinner tomorrow. Mark's parents are coming and the kids would love to see you. The olive branch was unexpected, and I accepted it with cautious gratitude. That would be lovely. What time? 6:30? And don't worry about bringing anything. We've got it all covered. I nodded, though I knew I would bring something anyway. Perhaps the blackberry cobbler that Jack loved. I'll be there. After Sarah left, I returned to my sorting with renewed determination. Our conversation had only reinforced my sense that change was necessary, not just in my living situation, but in the dynamics of our relationship. For too long, I had allowed Sarah's perception of me, as cautious, predictable, stuck in the past, to define our interactions. Perhaps it was time to challenge that perception more directly. The next evening, I arrived at Sarah and Mark's sprawling, Tudor-style home precisely at 6:30, cobbler in hand as planned. Mark's parents, Richard and Catherine, were already there, comfortably ensconced in the living room with pre-dinner drinks. They were pleasant people, if a bit reserved, and had always treated me with polite cordiality. There was none of the warmth I had shared with my own in-laws, but I had long ago accepted that not all family relationships evolve into deep connections. Grandma! Jack barreled into me as soon as I stepped through the door, nearly upsetting the cobbler. At 10, he was all gangly limbs and unrestrained enthusiasm, so different from his more measured sister. Careful there, buddy, I laughed, steadying both the dessert and myself. How's my favorite grandson today? I'm your only grandson, he pointed out, as he always did with this familiar exchange. But I'm awesome. I got an A on my science project about rocks, and Coach says I might start in the game on Saturday. That's wonderful news, I said, handing the cobbler to Sarah, who had appeared in the foyer. I'd love to hear more about that rock project. It's just rocks, Mom, Sarah interjected with a small laugh, taking the dessert with a quick, thanks, you didn't have to. She turned back to Jack. Why don't you go tell Grandpa and Grandma Turner about your game instead? I'm sure that's more interesting. The dismissal was subtle but clear. My interest in Jack's academic achievements was somehow less valuable than his other grandparents' interest in his athletic ones. I bit back the retort that rose to my lips, reminding myself that this evening was about building bridges, not burning them. Emma emerged from upstairs a few minutes later, engrossed in her phone, responding to my greeting with a distracted, "Hey, Grandma." I noticed she wasn't wearing the bracelet I'd given her, which wasn't surprising but still disappointed me slightly. Dinner was an elaborate affair. Roasted lamb, fingerling potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise, fresh bread from the artisanal bakery across town. The conversation flowed easily enough, centered mainly on the children's activities, Mark's latest real estate development, and an upcoming cruise that Richard and Catherine were planning. "You should consider joining us, Eleanor," Catherine offered during a lull. "It's a 2-week Mediterranean cruise, very civilized, and they have special rates for solo travelers." Before I could respond, Sarah jumped in. "Mom's not really one for extravagant trips, are you, Mom? She prefers to stay closer to home." There it was again, that presumption to speak for me, to define my preferences and limitations. In the past, I might have nodded along, allowing her characterization to stand. But something had shifted inside me since Emma's birthday party. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork deliberately, "a Mediterranean cruise sounds fascinating. I've always wanted to see the Greek Isles." 5 pairs of eyes turned to me in surprise. "Really?" Sarah said, not quite masking her skepticism. "You've never mentioned wanting to travel to Europe before." "There are many things I haven't mentioned, Sarah," I replied mildly. "That doesn't mean I haven't thought about them or wanted them." An awkward silence descended on the table, broken by Mark with a forced brightness. "Well, I think it would be great if you went, Eleanor. Everyone should see the Mediterranean at least once." "I'm not making any commitments tonight," I clarified. "But I appreciate the suggestion, Catherine. I'll definitely look into it." The conversation moved on, but I caught Sarah watching me with a puzzled expression several times throughout the remainder of the meal. Later, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, she cornered me in the kitchen where I was helping to clear dishes. "Since when are you interested in expensive cruises?" she asked quietly, keeping her voice low to avoid being overheard. "You've always been so careful with money." I continued rinsing a plate, taking my time before responding. "I've always been responsible with money," I corrected. "That's not the same as being unwilling to spend it on meaningful experiences." "Mom, a luxury cruise has to cost at least—" "I know exactly what it costs," I interrupted, turning to face her. "I looked into a similar cruise last year." This clearly surprised her. "You did? Why didn't you go?" I hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "The timing wasn't right, but that may change." Sarah studied me for a long moment, confusion evident in her eyes. "I don't understand what's happening with you lately. It's like you're suddenly a different person." "Not different," I said. "Just perhaps more willing to express parts of myself I've kept quiet about." I dried my hands on a kitchen towel. "People are complex, Sarah. Even mothers, even grandmothers. We contain multitudes, as Walt Whitman would say." "So now you're quoting poetry?" She shook her head, a tiny smile playing at the corner of her mouth despite her evident bewilderment. "Next, you'll be telling me you want to get a tattoo." I laughed. "Let's not get carried away. Though I did always think your father would look distinguished with a small anchor on his forearm." This startled a genuine laugh from her, and for a moment, I glimpsed the girl she had been, quick to humor, open to surprise, less armored against the world and its unpredictability. I missed that girl, I realized with a sudden ache. And perhaps she missed that version of herself as well. "I'm not having a crisis, Sarah," I said more gently. "I'm just making some changes that feel right for this stage of my life. I hope you can try to understand that." She nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her expression. "I'm trying, Mom. It's just unexpected." I squeezed her arm affectionately. "Life usually is, if you're doing it right." Ah. We rejoined the others in the living room, where Jack was enthusiastically explaining the rules of his latest video game obsession to his paternal grandparents, who were nodding with the glazed expressions of adults trying valiantly to follow a child's convoluted exposition. As I settled into an armchair with my coffee, Emma looked up from her phone and seemed to notice me properly for the first time that evening. "Oh, Grandma, I've been meaning to ask. Do you still have that old record player in your attic? The one that was great-grandpa's?" "I believe so," I said, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask?" Emma tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly looking younger than her 16 years. "We're doing this project in history class about how technology has evolved, and I thought maybe I could bring it in, show how people used to listen to music before streaming and stuff." "Of course," I said, warmth spreading through me at this unexpected interest in family history. "I'll look for it when I'm sorting through things this week." "You're still going through all that stuff?" Sarah interjected. "Mom, there's no rush to clear out the house, even if you are thinking of selling eventually." I took a sip of my coffee before responding. "Actually, I have an appointment with a realtor on Tuesday, just to get an assessment and understand my options." Mark looked up with sudden interest. "Who are you meeting with?" "I can recommend someone excellent if you haven't already chosen." "Marian Jeffries," I said. "She helped my friend Doris downsize last year. Doris was very pleased with her work." Mark nodded approvingly. "Marian's good, very knowledgeable about the local market. But if you want, I'd be happy to look over any paperwork before you sign anything. Real estate can be complicated, especially for someone my age," I supplied with a raised eyebrow. Mark had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I was going to say for someone who hasn't bought or sold property in a while. But I didn't mean to imply you couldn't handle it yourself." "I appreciate the offer," I said, keeping my tone light. "And I may take you up on it. 2 pairs of eyes are always better than 1. The evening concluded pleasantly enough, with promises to get together again soon. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I reflected on the subtle shifts in how my family had interacted with me tonight. There had been moments of the usual assumptions and dismissals, but also flickers of something new, curiosity perhaps, or the dawning recognition that I might not be as predictable as they had believed. It was a start, albeit a small one. But as I pulled into my driveway and looked up at the house where I had lived most of my adult life, where I had raised my daughter, loved my husband, mourned his passing, and gradually learned to live alone, I knew that larger changes were coming. Not just in my living situation, but in how I defined myself and allowed others to define me. The woman who had stood silent in Sarah's kitchen, hurt by thoughtless words about a birthday gift, was beginning to find her voice again, and that voice had much more to say. The following week passed in a blur of activity. Marian Jeffries confirmed what I had suspected. My house, with its generous lot in an established neighborhood, was worth considerably more than I had anticipated. The real estate market had boomed in recent years, and family homes in good school districts were in high demand. You could comfortably purchase a nice condo or townhouse and still have a significant sum to invest, Marian advised as we sat at my kitchen table reviewing comparable sales in the area. I nodded, considering the figures before me. "And how quickly do you think it would sell if I decided to list it?" Marian didn't hesitate. "In this market? We'd likely have multiple offers within a week, possibly even cash offers over asking price." The possibility of such a rapid change was both exhilarating and intimidating. Was I really ready to leave this house, with all its memories embedded in the very walls? Could I truly start fresh somewhere new at this stage of my life? As if reading my thoughts, Marian added gently, "There's no rush, Eleanor. It's important that you feel completely comfortable with any decision. This is a significant life change." "Yes, it is," I agreed, "but perhaps one that's overdue." After Marion left, I wandered through the rooms of my house, seeing them with new eyes, not just as the backdrop of my past, but as valuable space that could provide me with resources for a different future. A future where I might travel more, explore interests I'd set aside, perhaps even challenge my daughter's perceptions more directly. The thought of Sarah reminded me of my appointment with Michael later that week to finalize the changes to Emma and Jack's college funds. I had been pondering the best approach to eventually revealing these accounts to my grandchildren and their parents. Should I wait until Emma was ready to start college in less than 2 years? Should I tell Sarah and Mark separately, in advance? Or should I simply let the information emerge organically when the time was right? The morning of my meeting with Michael about the college funds, I woke early and found myself drawn to the small cedar chest I kept in my closet. Inside were mementos I'd saved from Emma and Jack's childhoods. Emma's first attempt at writing her name, Jack's handprint in faded clay, cards they'd made for me on various Mother's Days and birthdays when they were young enough that Sarah had encouraged such gestures. I lifted out a construction paper card with "I love you, Grandma," written in Emma's kindergarten handwriting, decorated with enthusiastic glitter and misshapen hearts. Back then, the gifts I gave, homemade cookies, bedtime stories, trips to the park, had been received with unfiltered delight. When had that changed? When had material value begun to overshadow emotional connection? I replaced the card and closed the chest, suddenly resolute. The college funds weren't just about money. They were about believing in my grandchildren's futures, about expressing love in a tangible, lasting way. I wouldn't allow Sarah's casual dismissal of my cheapness to diminish that. Michael's office was in a renovated Victorian house downtown, its interior transformed into a modern financial services firm while maintaining the charm of the original architecture. As I settled into the chair across from his desk, I noticed new family photos on his credenza. His daughter in a graduation cap and gown, his son with a new baby. "Congratulations," I said, nodding toward the photos. "You're a grandfather now." Michael's face softened with unmistakable pride. 3 months old and already running the household. He turned back to his computer screen. "Now, I have all the paperwork ready for the changes we discussed to Emma and Jack's accounts. The conversion to 529 plans will give them significant tax advantages while ensuring the funds are used specifically for educational expenses." I listened carefully as he outlined the details of the new arrangement, how the accounts would remain in my control until disbursement, how the funds could be used for tuition, room and board, books, and other qualified expenses at accredited institutions. "What about study abroad programs?" I asked, thinking of Emma's occasional mentions of wanting to spend a semester in France. "Would those be covered?" "Absolutely, as long as it's through an accredited educational program," Michael confirmed. "The rules are actually quite reasonable. The main point is that the money goes toward legitimate educational expenses, not, as you put it last time, spring break trips or new cars." I nodded, satisfied. "And Sarah and Mark will have no legal claim to redirect these funds?" "None whatsoever," Michael assured me. "The accounts will remain in your control until the beneficiaries, Emma and Jack, begin their college education. Then the funds will be dispersed directly to their educational institutions or to reimburse qualified expenses with proper documentation." As we finalized the paperwork, Michael gave me a thoughtful look. "Have you decided when you'll tell Sarah about these accounts?" I sighed, folding my reading glasses and tucking them into my purse. "Not yet. Part of me wants to wait until Emma is actually applying to colleges, when the information will be immediately useful. But another part of me wonders if knowing sooner might change some of Sarah's perceptions." "About your financial situation?" "About my priorities," I clarified. "Sarah seems to think I'm hoarding money out of some irrational frugality. She doesn't understand that living simply has allowed me to focus on what I consider important, like my grandchildren's education." Michael nodded sympathetically. Family dynamics can be complicated, especially where money is concerned. But these accounts represent a significant gift, Eleanor. I hope when the time comes to reveal them, that gift will be appreciated in the spirit it was given. I hoped so too, though doubt lingered. Would Sarah see this as an act of love? Or would she simply wonder why I hadn't told her sooner? Would she appreciate the sacrifice of living modestly to build these funds? Or would she criticize me for not spending more freely on myself and on more immediate gifts for the family? These questions followed me as I drove from Michael's office to meet Marion Jeffries, who had arranged viewings of several condominiums near downtown. The first was in a newly constructed building with sleek, modern fixtures and an open floor plan. It was objectively beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a landscaped courtyard, but felt impersonal, sterile. "This is very contemporary," I said diplomatically, running my hand along the cool quartz countertop. Marion smiled knowingly. "Not quite your style?" "I'm not sure it feels like home," I admitted. The second property was more promising, a two-bedroom unit in a converted factory building with exposed brick walls, wooden beams, and large industrial windows. It had character, history, a sense of having witnessed life before I arrived. The complex had a small communal garden, a library nook in the lobby, and was within walking distance of the local farmers market, the independent bookstore I'd frequented for years, and my favorite coffee shop. "This has possibilities," I said, standing in the center of the living room and trying to imagine my furniture arranged around me, my books on shelves along the walls, my morning coffee by those expansive windows. "The building has an interesting mix of residents," Marion noted. "Some young professionals, but also several retirees who wanted to downsize without leaving the neighborhood. There's quite an active social committee, monthly dinners, book clubs, movie nights." The prospect of a ready-made community was appealing. Since James died, my social circle had contracted gradually. Former colleagues had moved away to be near grandchildren. Some friends had passed on. Others were limited by health issues. I still had my book club and my volunteer work at the literacy center, but the idea of new connections, new perspectives, was unexpectedly enticing. "I'd like to think about this one," I told Marion. The third property was a small townhouse in a planned community for residents 55 and older. It was perfectly pleasant, with a small private patio, 2 bedrooms, and meticulous landscaping. But something about it felt too predictable, too much like the safe, expected choice for someone my age. "It's very nice," I said, unable to muster much enthusiasm. Marion seemed to understand without further explanation. "Not quite what you're looking for?" I shook my head. "I think I'm more drawn to the second option. I like the idea of a mixed community, of being downtown, of something with a bit more character." "The converted factory," Marion nodded. "It does have a special quality to it. Shall we put in an offer?" The question caught me off guard. Was I really ready to take such a concrete step? To formally begin the process of leaving the house where I'd raised my family? "I should probably sell my house first," I hedged. "Actually," Marion said, "in this market, we could make your offer contingent on the sale of your current home. And given how quickly houses are selling in your neighborhood, that shouldn't be an issue. But of course, there's no rush if you're not ready." Not ready. The phrase echoed in my mind. When would I be ready for such a significant change? Perhaps readiness wasn't something that arrived fully formed, but something that developed through action, through movement forward despite uncertainty. "Let's do it," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Let's make an offer on the factory conversion." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of paperwork, property disclosures, and preparations to list my house. Marion brought in a staging consultant who gently suggested removing some of my more personal items and rearranging furniture to make spaces look larger and more inviting to potential buyers. I found myself packing away family photographs, the quilt my mother had made that usually draped over the sofa, James's collection of antique fishing lures that had hung in the hallway for decades. It feels strange, I confessed to my friend Diane over coffee in my partially transformed living room. Like I'm erasing myself from my own home. Diane, who had downsized 5 years earlier after her divorce, nodded understandingly. It's disorienting, but remember it's temporary. You're not erasing yourself. You're making space for someone else to imagine their future here. Meanwhile, you're creating a new space that will be entirely yours. If my offer is accepted, I reminded her. Marion had submitted my offer on the converted factory unit the day before, and we were waiting to hear back. It will be, Diane said with confidence, and then you'll get to decide which parts of this life you want to bring forward, and which you're ready to leave behind. It's actually quite liberating once you embrace it. I was contemplating her words when my phone rang. It was Sarah. Mom, are you busy right now? Just having coffee with Diane, I said. What's up? Emma just told me she needs her great-grandfather's record player for a school project tomorrow. She mentioned you were going to look for it? I can swing by and pick it up if you found it. In the flurry of real estate activity, I had completely forgotten about Emma's request. Oh, I haven't had a chance to check the attic yet. Let me go look right now. I can come help, Sarah offered. That would be nice, I said, surprised by the offer. Sarah rarely volunteered to help with such tasks. I'm sure it's up there somewhere. After saying goodbye to Diane, I pulled down the attic stairs and climbed up with a flashlight. The space was neat. I had organized it thoroughly after James died. But there were still dozens of boxes and pieces of furniture stored under dust covers. I was examining a promising trunk when I heard Sarah's voice from below. Mom, I'm here. Come on up, I called. I think it might be in this trunk. Sarah climbed the stairs, wrinkling her nose slightly at the dust and musty smell. She was dressed casually for once, in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. It reminded me of how she'd looked as a teenager, helping me clean out this same attic before leaving for college. What's all this? She asked, gesturing to several boxes labeled for donation that I'd brought up recently as part of my clearing out. Just sorting through things, I said vaguely, opening the trunk. Ah, here it is. I carefully lifted out my father's old record player, a beautiful mahogany cabinet model from the 1950s. Does it still work? Sarah asked, running her fingers along the wooden lid. It did the last time I checked, though that's been years ago, I admitted. We should test it before. Emma takes it to school. There are some records in that box over there. Sarah retrieved the box and opened it, smiling as she lifted out an album. Dad's Beatles collection. Remember how he used to play these on Sunday mornings while making breakfast? The memory was vivid. James flipping pancakes while singing, along to Here Comes the Sun, Sarah setting the table, me reading the newspaper, the three of us in our little cocoon of familial contentment. He loved those records, I said, swallowing against a sudden tightness in my throat. Let's take everything downstairs where we can set it up properly. Between the two of us, we carefully maneuvered the record player down the narrow attic, stairs, and into the living room. I cleared space on a side table while Sarah examined the power cord. It seems intact, she said. No fraying or damage. I plugged it in and we both held our breath as I switched it on. The turntable began to rotate smoothly, the needle arm responsive when I tested it. It works, Sarah exclaimed with genuine delight. Let's try a record. She selected Abbey Road from the box and handed it to me. I carefully removed the vinyl from its sleeve, placed it on the turntable, and positioned the needle. After a moment of crackling, the familiar opening notes of Come Together filled the room. the sound quality remarkably rich despite the equipment's age. Sarah closed her eyes, a small smile playing at her lips. I'd forgotten how different. Music sounds on vinyl. So much warmer than digital. We stood together, listening in companionable silence. When the song ended, Sarah opened her eyes and looked around the room properly for the first time since arriving. "You've rearranged things," she observed. "And where are all the family photos that used to be on that wall?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about my plans. But the moment of connection we'd just shared over the record player made me hope that perhaps she would understand. "I've packed them away temporarily," I said. "I'm having the house photographed for listing next week." Sarah's expression shifted, from curiosity to shock. "Listing? You're actually going through with selling the house?" "Yes," I confirmed simply. "But why didn't you tell me you were this far along in the process?" Her voice held a note of hurt beneath the indignation. "You made it sound like you were just thinking about it. Maybe someday." "Things have moved quickly," I explained. "The market is strong right now, and I found a place downtown that I really like." "Downtown," she repeated flatly. "In one of those hipster apartments you mentioned." "It's a converted factory building," I said, trying to keep my tone even, despite her dismissive characterization. "It has lovely architectural details, great natural light, and it's walking distance to everything I enjoy." Sarah crossed her arms, her earlier warmth evaporating. "And when were you planning to tell me about this? When the moving truck showed up?" "Of course not," I said, stung by the accusation. "I was waiting until my offer was accepted. Which it might not be," I added, though Marion had called that morning to say the sellers were reviewing my offer favorably. "I don't understand this sudden rush," Sarah said, pacing now. "This house is practically paid off. It makes no financial sense to move, especially to rent some overpriced downtown apartment." "I'm not renting, I'm buying, and it makes perfect sense for me," I countered, feeling my own patience wearing thin. "This house is too large for one person to maintain. The new place will be more manageable, more suited to my current lifestyle." "What lifestyle?" Sarah demanded. "You've lived in this neighborhood for 35 years. Your friends are here, your routines are established. Downtown is all 20-somethings and childless professionals. You'll be completely out of place." The condescension in her tone ignited something within me, a slow-burning anger that had been building since Emma's birthday party. "I don't need to be in place, Sarah," I said quietly but firmly. "I need to be where I want to be, doing what I want to do, at this stage of my life, not what others think is appropriate for someone my age." She stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "This isn't like you, Mom. All these impulsive decisions." "Stop saying that," I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. "There is nothing impulsive about carefully considering a change after 12 years of living alone in a house designed for a family. Nothing impulsive about wanting to simplify my life, reduce my maintenance responsibilities, and be closer to the activities I enjoy." Sarah seemed taken, aback by my vehemence. "I'm just concerned about you," she said, her tone softening slightly. "Making such a big change at your—" She caught herself before saying, "at your age," but the implication hung in the air between us. "I'm 68, not 98, I said dryly. "Plenty of people my age and older make significant life changes." "It's called growth, Sarah. It doesn't stop at some predetermined age." She sighed, running a hand through her hair in a gesture so like her father's that it momentarily disarmed me. "I just don't want you to do something you'll regret, or something that's unnecessary." The hesitation before unnecessary caught my attention. "What do you mean by that?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Just that. If you're concerned about managing the house, we could hire someone to help with maintenance, lawn care, whatever you need. There's no reason to uproot your entire life. Except that I want to, I pointed out. This isn't about finding ways to stay in a situation that no longer fits. It's about creating something new that does fit. She looked around the living room, her expression a mixture of confusion and what might have been fear. "But this is home," she said. And for a moment, I heard the echo of a much younger Sarah, the child who had found security in these walls, in the predictability of her mother always being here, unchanged, unchanging. My anger softened, though my resolve didn't waver. "It was our family home," I said gently, "and I cherish those memories. But now it's just my house, and I'm ready for something different." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absently tracing patterns on the record player's wooden cabinet. "I always imagined my kids growing up with this being Grandma's house," she finally said. "The place that never changes while everything else does." The admission was surprisingly vulnerable, revealing a sentimental streak Sarah rarely displayed. It also helped me understand her resistance to my plans. This wasn't just about me changing. It was about her children losing a connection to their childhood, to family history. "The record player," I said suddenly. Sarah looked up, puzzled. "What about it?" "Emma wanted it for a school project, but afterward, she should keep it. Not just borrow it. It should be hers." "Are you sure?" "It was your father's, which is why it should go to his great-granddaughter," I said firmly. "Along with the records. These things shouldn't just sit in an attic. They should be used, enjoyed, part of someone's present, not just relics of the past." Sarah considered this, then nodded slowly. "Emma would love that. She's been getting into vintage things lately. Records, film photography, typewriters." "Then it's settled," I said, feeling a small but significant shift in the atmosphere between us. "And Sarah, the house might be changing, but I'm not disappearing. My grandchildren will always have a place with me wherever I live." She didn't look entirely convinced, but some of the tension had left her shoulders. "I suppose I should at least see this converted factory that's so appealing to you," she said, making a visible effort to sound supportive. "Maybe once you have a firm offer?" "I'd like that," I agreed, grateful for this small concession. We spent the next hour testing the record player with various albums, making sure it was functioning properly for Emma's presentation. The shared activity eased the remaining awkwardness from our confrontation, allowing us to find our way back to the moment of connection we'd experienced when the music first played. As Sarah was preparing to leave with the record player carefully packed in her car, she paused in the doorway. "Mom, are you really happy about this move? Not just doing it because it seems practical or because you think you should downsize?" The question was surprisingly perceptive, showing a level of concern for my emotional well-being rather than just practical considerations. I took a moment to consider my answer. "I'm nervous," I admitted. Change is always a little frightening, especially at this stage of life. But yes, I'm genuinely excited about the possibilities. It feels like an adventure. Sarah's expression softened. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds almost appealing." She hesitated, then added, "Just promise you'll keep me in the loop from now on? No more surprise life changes?" I nodded, though privately. I wondered how she would react to the eventual revelation of Emma and Jack's college funds. That would certainly qualify as a surprise life change in her eyes. But that was a bridge to cross another day. After Sarah left, I stood in my partially dismantled living room, the ghost of music still hanging in the air. Our conversation had been difficult, but necessary. A small step toward Sarah seeing me not just as her predictable, unchanging mother, but as a person with evolving needs and desires. Whether this new understanding would extend to other aspects of our relationship, like her perception of my financial choices, remained to be seen. The following morning, Marion called with news. My offer on the converted factory condominium had been accepted. contingent on the sale of my house. "Congratulations!" she exclaimed. "Now we just need to get your place on the market. The photographer is scheduled for tomorrow, and we can list by the weekend." Reality settled over me, both exhilarating and daunting. This was happening. I was actually going to sell the house where I'd lived most of my adult life and move to a completely different environment. The decision, which had felt somewhat theoretical until now, suddenly acquired the weight of inevitability. I spent the day in a flurry of activity, completing final touches suggested by the staging consultant, storing away personal items, touching up paint on baseboards. By evening, I was exhausted but satisfied with the transformation. The house looked beautiful, if somewhat impersonal, ready for strangers to envision their own futures within its walls. I was just making a cup of tea when my phone rang again. This time it was Emma. "Grandma? Mom said you're giving me great-grandpa's record player? Like, to keep?" Her voice held a note of disbelieving excitement that warmed my heart. "Yes, sweetheart. I think he would have wanted you to have it. Are you pleased?" "Are you kidding? It's amazing. All my friends are going to freak out. Vintage audio equipment is super cool right now." I laughed at her enthusiasm. "Well, I'm glad to know your great-grandfather was super cool without realizing it. How did your presentation go?" "It was great. Everyone wanted to hear how it worked. And Mr. Delaney, that's my history teacher, he actually brought in some of his own records for us to play. Did you know he collects jazz albums from the 1940s? "I didn't know that," I said, charmed by her animation. Emma could be so closed off lately, so carefully calibrated in her responses, that this burst of genuine enthusiasm was refreshing. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you. It's like the best gift ever. The simple, heartfelt gratitude caught me off guard. When was the last time Emma, or anyone in my family for that matter, had thanked me so directly, without qualification or comparison? "You're very welcome, Emma. Maybe sometime you could come over and we could look through the rest of the records together. There are some wonderful albums in that collection that you might enjoy." "Yeah, that would be cool," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Mom mentioned you might be moving, though? Is that true?" The question reminded me that family news traveled quickly. "I'm in the process of selling the house," I confirmed. "I found a nice condominium downtown that I think will suit me better now." "Downtown? That's awesome. Is it one of those cool converted buildings with the big windows and brick walls?" Her immediate positive reaction was so different from her mother's that I almost laughed. "As a matter of fact, it is. You'll have to come see it once everything is finalized." "Definitely. My friend Zoe's older sister lives in one of those buildings, and it's so stylish. You'll be like the coolest grandma ever." The assessment, delivered with teenage hyperbole but genuine approval, lifted my spirits. At least one member of my family was excited about my new direction. After chatting a few more minutes about the record player and her plans for building a vinyl collection, Emma said goodbye with another thank you that left me smiling. The conversation reinforced something I'd begun to suspect. Perhaps the best way to shift perceptions was not through explanation or justification, but through action. By making changes, by moving forward according to my own wishes rather than others' expectations, I was creating a new narrative, not just for myself, but for how my family understood me. The photographer arrived early the next morning, capturing the house in its most flattering light. By afternoon, Marion had created a listing with a virtual tour, professional photos, and a description that somehow made my comfortable but ordinary home sound like an exclusive opportunity. As I reviewed the listing on my laptop, a notification popped up from my email. A message from Michael with the final documents for Emma and Jack's college funds attached for my electronic signature. Two major life changes, proceeding simultaneously, both representing different aspects of my evolution. One focused on my own future, the other on my grandchildren's. I signed the documents, officially establishing the 529 plans that would help Emma and Jack pursue their education without financial burden. Then I approved the house listing, setting in motion the process of finding new owners for the home where I had taught Sarah to ride a bike, where James and I had celebrated anniversaries, where I had gradually learned to live alone. Both actions felt right, aligned with my values and with the person I was becoming, someone who honored the past without being confined by it, who planned carefully for those she loved while also attending to her own needs and desires. Someone who was, perhaps, ready to surprise her daughter and others with the unexpected depths beneath her seemingly predictable surface. As I closed my laptop, I felt a sense of peace descend. Whatever came next, whether Sarah's continued resistance or eventual understanding, whether my new home proved to be the right choice or merely a stepping stone to something else, I was moving forward on my own terms. And there was profound satisfaction in that knowledge, in reclaiming my story from those who thought they already knew how it would end. The for sale sign appeared in my front yard on a Wednesday morning, a tangible marker of the changes unfolding in my life. By Wednesday afternoon, Marion had called to schedule 6 showings for the coming weekend. By Wednesday evening, Sarah had left 3 increasingly concerned voicemails on my phone. I was placing books in boxes when I finally returned her call, the phone wedged between my ear and shoulder as I worked. "Mom, I've been trying to reach you all day," Sarah said immediately, her words tumbling out in a rush. "There's a for sale sign in your yard. People are already driving by slowly to look at the house." "Yes," I said calmly, wrapping a framed photograph in bubble wrap. "Marion put the listing up this morning. We're expecting a lot of interest." "This is happening so fast," Sarah said, her voice tight with what sounded like barely controlled panic. "Have you really thought this through? Once you sell, there's no going back." I set down the box cutter I'd been using and gave the conversation my full attention. "Sarah, I've been thinking about this for longer than you realize. It's not a snap decision." "But you've only been talking about it for a couple of weeks," she protested. "I've been considering it for over a year," I corrected gently. "Ever since Diane moved to her townhouse and seemed so much happier without the burden of maintaining a large property." This seemed to momentarily stymie her. "A year? Why didn't you say anything?" It was a fair question, one that made me reflect on the patterns of communication, or lack thereof, that had developed between us. "I suppose I wasn't ready to discuss it until I'd worked through my own feelings about the possibility," I said after a moment. "And to be honest, I wasn't sure you'd be supportive." The silence on the other end confirmed the accuracy of my assessment. Finally, Sarah sighed. "I'm trying to understand, Mom. I really am. But this house, it's more than just a building to me. It's where I grew up, where Dad was." Her voice trailed off, and I suddenly grasped the deeper source of her resistance. This wasn't just about me changing. It was about her losing the last physical connection to her father. James had been gone for 12 years, but the house remained infused with his presence. The den where he'd read the Sunday paper, the kitchen where he'd perfected his pancake recipe, the backyard where he'd taught Sarah to throw a baseball. "Oh, Sarah," I said softly. "I understand. I do. Your father is in these walls for me too. But he's also in our memories, our stories, the values he instilled in you and that you're passing on to your children. We don't lose that by letting go of the house." "I know that logically," she admitted, her voice smaller than usual. "But it still feels like another goodbye." The vulnerability in her tone touched me deeply. Sarah so rarely revealed her softer emotions, particularly regarding her father. She had been 28 when he died, already married to Mark, beginning to establish her own family. She had grieved fiercely but privately, throwing herself into work and motherhood in a way that left little space for discussing her loss. "What if," I suggested carefully, "before the house sells, we have a family dinner here? One last gathering. In this space to share memories, stories about your father, maybe look through old photo albums together. There was a pause. Then Sarah said with unexpected warmth, "I'd like that." The kids would too, I think. Especially Emma. She's been asking questions about Grandpa lately. "This weekend?" I proposed. "Saturday evening? The house is all tidied up for showings anyway." "Perfect. I'll bring Dad's favorite lasagna recipe." After we hung up, I sat among my half-packed boxes, contemplating the conversation. It had revealed a dimension of Sarah's resistance that I hadn't fully appreciated. Grief intertwined with fear of change, of losing connections to the past. It reminded me that my journey toward a new chapter wasn't happening in isolation. It was affecting those around me in ways I might not always anticipate. The insight didn't change my resolve to move forward with my plans, but it did deepen my empathy for Sarah's struggle to accept those plans. Perhaps this farewell dinner would help bridge the gap between us, allow her to see that while circumstances might change, the essential bonds of family remained. Thursday and Friday passed in a blur of preparations, not just for the weekend, house showings, but for what I had come to think of as our remembrance dinner. I found photo albums that had been stored away for years, unearthed James's old fishing tackle box with its treasured lures, dug out the carved wooden box containing ticket stubs, dried flowers, and other mementos from our early years together. Each item stirred memories. Our first date to a community theater production of Our Town, the pressed corsage from my senior prom, the hospital bracelet from when Sarah was born, the congratulatory card from when James completed his medical residency. So many fragments of a shared life, physical tokens of moments both extraordinary and mundane. I was so absorbed in this archaeological expedition through my own past that I almost forgot about the house showings until Marion called Friday evening to confirm the schedule. "We have 8 appointments tomorrow," she reported, her voice brimming with satisfaction. "And 3 on Sunday. I wouldn't be surprised if we have offers by Monday." "That's wonderful," I said, though a flutter of anxiety accompanied my words. The reality of leaving this house, with all its accumulated history, was beginning to feel increasingly concrete. "Just remember to be out of the house during the showings," Marion reminded me. "Potential buyers feel more comfortable exploring without the owner present." I assured her I would be scarce during the appointed times, then returned to my preparations for the family dinner. I had decided to make James's favorite dessert, peach cobbler with homemade vanilla ice cream, a recipe his mother had passed down and that I had perfected over decades of marriage. The familiar rhythms of measuring, mixing, and simmering were soothing, grounding me in the midst of so much change. Saturday morning arrived with perfect early autumn weather, crisp, clear, ideal for house hunting. I left early, before the first showing, taking refuge in the local botanical gardens where I wandered among late-blooming dahlias and early chrysanthemums, breathing in the earthy scent of approaching fall. My phone buzzed with a text from Marion. After each showing, "Lovely couple, very interested. Family with teenagers, love the layout. Empty nesters looking to upsize, wrote down measurements." Each message increased the likelihood that soon this house would belong to someone else, would be the backdrop for another family's story. By late afternoon, I returned home to prepare for the evening gathering. The house felt different somehow, as if the parade of strangers examining its features had already begun the process of transforming it from mine to not mine. I pushed the sensation aside and focused on final preparations, setting the dining room table with my good china, arranging framed family photographs on the sideboard, placing vases of fresh flowers throughout the first floor. Sarah, Mark, and the children arrived promptly at 6, Sarah carrying a foil-covered lasagna dish, Mark a bottle of wine. Emma immediately noticed the display of photographs and drifted toward them, while Jack investigated the dessert cooling on the kitchen counter. "Grandma, is that peach cobbler?" he asked, his eyes widening with anticipation. "With homemade vanilla ice cream," I confirmed, ruffling his hair affectionately. Your grandfather's favorite. Cool, Jack said, though whether he was responding to the dessert or the connection to his grandfather wasn't entirely clear. Sarah set the lasagna on the counter and looked around the kitchen, her expression a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. The house looks different, she observed. More open. The staging consultant suggested removing some furniture to make the spaces look larger, I explained. And of course, I've packed away a lot of personal items. She nodded, running her fingers along the countertop as if committing its texture to memory. Where will all these things go? In your new place? Some of them, I said, but the condominium is much smaller, so I'm being selective. I thought perhaps you and the children might like to choose some items to keep. Sarah's expression softened. Really? There are some things I've always loved. Like what? I prompted, curious about which objects held meaning for her. She hesitated, then said, the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one Dad was always so proud of restoring. And maybe some of the books from his medical collection? For Jack, if he's still interested in becoming a doctor when he's older. Of course, I agreed readily. Those things should stay in the family. Make a list of anything else that's special to you. Mark joined us, opening the wine and pouring glasses for the adults. The place is showing well, he said with professional appreciation. Clean, bright, good flow between rooms. You should get multiple offers. That's what Marion thinks, I confirmed, accepting a glass of wine. Have you thought about what you'll do if it sells very quickly? He asked. Your new place won't be ready for closing for what? 6 weeks? It was a practical question, one I'd been avoiding confronting directly. I'll figure something out, I said vaguely. Maybe a short-term rental. You could stay with us, Sarah said unexpectedly. We have the guest suite in the basement. It would give you time to pack properly, not rush the moving process. The offer caught me off guard. Given Sarah's resistance to my relocation plans, this gesture of support, however practical, represented a shift. That's very kind, I said. Let's see what happens with the offers first. We moved to the dining room for dinner. The lasagna, perfectly complemented by a salad I'd prepared and the crusty bread Mark had brought from the artisanal bakery. The conversation flowed more easily than I had anticipated, perhaps aided by the deliberate focus on memories of James. Tell us something about Grandpa that we don't know, Emma requested, looking up from her plate with genuine interest. I thought, for a moment, then smiled as a memory surfaced. Your grandfather was absolutely terrible at home repairs. Once, he decided to fix a leaking faucet in the upstairs bathroom. 6 hours and 3 trips to the hardware store later, we had a geyser coming through the kitchen ceiling. Mark laughed. A doctor who couldn't fix a faucet? He used to say the human body was straightforward compared to plumbing. I confirmed, chuckling at the recollection. After that incident, he stuck to what he knew best and called professionals for everything else. I remember when he built that birdhouse for my 2nd grade science project, Sarah added, her eyes crinkling with amusement. It was so lopsided that no self-respecting bird would have moved in, but he was so proud of it. He stayed up all night working on that, I recalled, cursing under his breath when he thought you couldn't hear. What else? Jack asked eagerly. Did he play sports? Was he good at video games? These questions led to more stories. James's disastrous attempt to coach Sarah's softball team when she was 10. His unexpected skill at the early Atari video games. His ability to name every bird that visited our backyard feeders. His terrible singing voice but absolute love of opera that led him to belt out arias in the shower. As we shared these memories, some familiar to all of us, others known only to Sarah or myself, James seemed to become more present, not just as an absence to be mourned, but as a vibrant part of our collective history, still influencing and connecting us. After dinner, we gathered in the living room with coffee and peach cobbler. I had placed the carved wooden memory box on the coffee table, and now I opened it, inviting everyone to explore its contents. "What's this?" Emma asked, carefully lifting out a small velvet pouch. "Open it," I encouraged. She loosened the drawstring and tipped a delicate seashell into her palm. "It's beautiful," she said, running her finger over its pearlescent surface. "Where's it from?" "Your grandfather gave that to me on our first beach vacation together," I explained. "We went to Sanibel Island in Florida about 6 months after we started dating. He found that shell during a morning walk and presented it to me quite formally, saying, 'This isn't an engagement ring, but consider it a placeholder until I can afford one.'" Sarah looked up from examining a concert program she'd extracted from the box. "I never knew that story," she said softly. "There are many stories in this box," I replied. "Some I've shared before, others I haven't. But they're all part of our family history, and they don't depend on this house to remain meaningful." The evening continued with more exploration, more stories, more laughter, and occasional tears. Jack discovered his grandfather's old pocket compass and was fascinated by its mechanics. Emma found a stack of letters James and I had exchanged during our brief separation when he attended a medical conference in Europe early in our marriage, reading aloud passages that made me blush, and the others teased me good-naturedly. As the night drew to a close, a sense of peaceful completion settled over me. We hadn't erased the sadness of James's absence or fully reconciled Sarah to my impending move, but we had reaffirmed the connections that transcended physical space, that would endure regardless of where I lived. "Thank you for suggesting this," Sarah said quietly as she helped me carry dishes to the kitchen while Mark supervised the children packing up items they'd asked to keep. It was important, more than I realized. I nodded, understanding what she wasn't quite saying, that she had needed this ritual of remembrance to help her begin accepting the change ahead. "The house may be sold," I said, placing a gentle hand on her arm, "but the memories, the love, the family bonds, those aren't for sale. Those come with me, with you, wherever we go." Sarah's eyes glistened slightly, but she managed a small smile. "I know. It's just, change is hard sometimes." "Yes," I agreed simply, "but necessary." Sunday brought more house showings and, by evening, the news from Marion that we had received 3 offers, all over asking price, 2 with minimal conditions. "I'd recommend accepting the highest offer," she advised over the phone. "They're pre-approved for financing, and they're flexible on the closing date if you need time to arrange your transition to the new place." "Let's do it," I said, making the decision that would irrevocably set my new path in motion. The next morning, I signed the acceptance papers in Marion's office, officially agreeing to sell my home of 35 years to a young couple expecting their first child. There was a pleasing symmetry to it. James and I had bought the house just before Sarah was born, and now it would welcome another new family at the beginning of their journey together. "Congratulations," Marion said as I handed back the signed documents. "Now we just wait for the inspection and appraisal. But given the condition of your home, I don't anticipate any issues." I nodded, experiencing a complex mixture of emotions: relief, excitement, wistfulness, apprehension. "And my new place? Any updates on the timeline?" "The sellers are still aiming for a mid-October closing," she confirmed. "So there will be a gap of about 3 weeks between when you need to vacate your house and when you can move into the condominium." "Sarah offered their guest suite," I said, still somewhat surprised by the gesture. "I suppose I should take her up on it." "That sounds ideal," Marion agreed. "Short-term rentals are expensive, and it would give you time to prepare for the move without rushing." I wasn't entirely convinced that living under the same roof as Sarah, even temporarily, was ideal, but it did seem the most practical solution. And perhaps it would provide an opportunity to continue strengthening our relationship during this period of transition. With the house sale proceeding and my living arrangements for the gap period tentatively settled, I turned my attention to the long-postponed task of sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. It was daunting work, each closet and cabinet yielding forgotten treasures and mundane objects alike, each requiring decisions about keeping, discarding, donating, or passing along to family members. I was in the midst of this excavation, specifically sorting through a box of Sarah's childhood memorabilia I'd discovered in the back of the guest room closet when my phone rang. It was Michael, my financial advisor. "Eleanor, I'm glad I caught you," he said after our initial greetings. "I wanted to let you know that there's been a significant development regarding Emma's college plans." My pulse quickened slightly. "What's happened?" "Sarah called me this morning," Michael explained. "She was quite distressed about your house sale and wanted to discuss your financial situation. She seemed concerned that you might be selling because of money problems." I closed my eyes briefly, suppressing a flash of irritation. Despite our progress during the remembrance dinner, Sarah was still operating under her assumptions about my motives. "What did you tell her?" I asked carefully. "Only the most general reassurance that your finances are in good order," Michael said. "Client confidentiality prevented me from sharing specifics, of course. But during the conversation, she mentioned that Emma has been accepted for early admission to Wellston University. This was news to me. Wellston? That's her dream school." "Yes, and apparently quite expensive," Michael continued. Sarah seemed very concerned about the cost, mentioning that they had hoped to use their home equity line to help cover tuition, but are hesitant given the current interest rates. I sat back against the closet door, absorbing this information. Wellston was a prestigious private university with an excellent arts program, exactly the kind of school that would nurture Emma's creative talents. It was also, as Michael noted, extremely costly. "Did Sarah directly ask you if I could help with Emma's tuition?" I asked, curious about how explicit the conversation had been. Michael hesitated. "Not in so many words. She mentioned that they were exploring all family resources and wondered if I had any suggestions for how you might optimize your assets for family benefit now that you're selling your home." I couldn't help but laugh softly at the transparent attempt to indirectly assess my willingness to contribute to Emma's education, especially given that I had already been silently doing exactly that for years. "And what did you say to that?" I inquired. "I suggested she discuss it directly with you," Michael replied diplomatically. "But the timing seems significant, Eleanor. Emma will be starting college next fall. The 529 plan you've established for her would cover most, if not all, of her expenses at Wellston." The implication was clear. Perhaps it was time to reveal the existence of these funds rather than waiting for some perfect moment that might never arrive. "You think I should tell Sarah about the college accounts now?" I said, making it a statement rather than a question. "I think it might address several issues at once," Michael suggested carefully. "It would alleviate their concerns about affording Emma's education, and it might help Sarah better understand the financial choices you've been making. Living modestly not out of miserliness, but with specific goals in mind." The idea had merit. The college funds had always been intended as a gift, not a bargaining chip or a secret to be hoarded. And if Sarah and Mark were genuinely worried about how to finance Emma's education at her dream school, knowing about the 529 plan would provide significant relief. "Let me think about it," I told Michael. "The timing and approach matter. I don't want this to seem like I've been deliberately concealing something, even though that's technically what I've been doing." "Of course," he agreed. "Just remember that these accounts represent something positive. Your love and support for your grandchildren, your desire to help secure their future. That's the essence of what you'll be sharing, regardless of when or how you do it." After we hung up, I returned to sorting through Sarah's childhood mementos, though my mind was occupied with this new development. Among the items in the box was a scrapbook Sarah had created for a high school assignment. My Future, it was titled. Inside were magazine cutouts, drawings, and written descriptions of the life she had envisioned for herself at 17. I paged through it, smiling at her teenage ambitions. A career as an architect, travel to at least 20 countries, a marriage to someone smart and adventurous, 2 children who will be encouraged to follow their own dreams, not anyone else's. Expectations. The last page featured a handwritten list titled What I've Learned from My Parents. Under this heading, Sarah had written, From Mom, Independence, the value of education, how to stand up for yourself, that it's never too late to try something new. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, touched by this evidence that the younger Sarah had seen qualities in me that the adult Sarah seemed to have forgotten, or that I had somehow stopped embodying in ways she could recognize. Perhaps it was time to remind us both of these qualities, to demonstrate that the mother who had taught her about independence and new beginnings was still very much present, still making choices based on those same values. And perhaps revealing the college funds would be a powerful way to do that, showing that while Sarah had been viewing me as increasingly irrelevant, I had been quietly securing a significant aspect of her children's future. The decision crystallized. I would tell Sarah about the 529 plan soon, but not immediately. First, I wanted to complete the sale of my house and finalize the purchase of the condominium. I wanted to stand on the solid ground of my own choices before introducing this new element into our relationship. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of logistics. The house inspection revealed minor issues that were quickly addressed. The appraisal came in above the sale price. Final paperwork was signed. Throughout this process, Sarah maintained a careful distance, calling occasionally to check on progress, but not offering further opinions about my decision. Emma, on the other hand, became an unexpected ally. She started dropping by after school to help me sort through items, offering opinions on what to keep for the new place, what to donate, what might find new life in her own room, or with friends who were totally into vintage stuff right now. During one of these afternoons, as we carefully wrapped my grandmother's teacups in newspaper, Emma mentioned her college acceptance. Mom said Grandma's moving into our basement for a while, she remarked, skillfully nestling a delicate cup in a protective layer of packing material. That's when I'm going to tell you all about Wellston. I got accepted early decision. That's wonderful news, Emma, I said, genuinely delighted both by her accomplishment and her desire to share it. With me, Wellston has an excellent reputation, especially for their arts programs. Emma looked up, pleased by my knowledge of the school. You've heard of their photography department? That's what I want to study, maybe with a minor in art history. Or creative writing. But her enthusiasm dimmed slightly. It's pretty expensive. Mom and Dad are freaking out a little about the cost. The opening was perfect, an ideal moment to mention the college fund. But I held back, maintaining my resolve to wait until my own transition was further along. Instead, I said, I'm sure they'll figure something out. Your education is important. Emma nodded, returning to her careful wrapping. Mom mentioned they might ask you to help out with tuition now that you're selling the house. Is that okay? I told her it seemed kind of presumptuous, but she said that's what family is for. The casual revelation of this conversation that had apparently happened without my knowledge confirmed my instinct to establish my own independence before addressing the college funds. Your mother and I haven't discussed that yet, I said mildly. But let's not worry about it today. Tell me more about what you want to study at Wellston. As Emma launched into an enthusiastic description of the photography program and the university's state-of-the-art darkroom facilities, I mentally reinforced my plan. Complete my move, settle into my new space, and then, from a position of established autonomy, reveal the gift I had been preparing for years. Not as a response to a request or expectation, but as an expression of my own values and priorities. The moving date arrived on a brilliantly clear October morning. The house was empty except for the few pieces of furniture I had decided to keep but would store temporarily. The boxes destined for my new condominium, and the suitcases containing what I would need during my stay with Sarah and Mark. I stood in the center of the living room, absurdly reminded of the day James and I had first walked through the empty house as its new owners, our footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, our voices bouncing off bare walls as we planned where furniture would go. What color to paint each room, how to transform this empty shell into a home. Now, decades later, I was returning it to emptiness, completing a circle that had begun with hope and possibility and was ending with, what? Not despair or defeat, certainly. Rather, a different kind of possibility, a new beginning rather than an ending. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reverie. It was Sarah, come to help me transport the last items to her house. All set? She asked, surveying the nearly empty space. Yes, I said. Just a few more things to load in the car. Together, we carried the remaining boxes and suitcases out to her SUV. When everything was stowed, I took a final walk through each room, checking. Closets and cabinets out of habit, though I knew they were empty. In what had been James's study, I paused. This room had been the hardest to pack, filled as it was with so many reminders of him. Now, with the bookshelves bare and his desk removed, it seemed smaller, more ordinary. Just a room with good natural light and a view of the backyard oak tree. Sarah appeared in the doorway. You okay, Mom? I nodded, turning to face her. Just saying goodbye to the house, ready for the next adventure. She offered a small smile, still tinged with uncertainty, but no longer actively resistant. Well, let's get you settled in our guest suite. Emma's particularly excited about having you stay with us. She's already planning movie nights and wants you to teach her how to make Grandpa's famous pancakes. As we locked the door behind us for the final time and walked down the front path, I felt a weight lifting. Not the burden of memories or attachment, which I would carry forward gladly, but the constraint of others' expectations about who I should be at this stage of life, how I should behave, what choices were appropriate for a widow, a mother, a grandmother. Climbing into Sarah's car, I glanced back at the house. My home no longer, but forever, a part of my story. Then I faced forward, toward the temporary haven of Sarah's guest suite, and beyond that, to the downtown condominium that represented my chosen future. And somewhere along that path, I would find the right moment to reveal the final piece of my transformation, the gift that would challenge once and for all Sarah's perception of me as merely cheap. Living in Sarah and Mark's basement guest suite was an exercise in diplomacy. The space itself was comfortable enough, a bedroom with an adjoining sitting area, a small but functional bathroom, and a kitchenette equipped with a mini refrigerator, microwave, and coffee maker. It had been designed for Mark's visiting parents, who stayed for extended periods each winter, escaping the harsh Michigan climate for Tennessee's milder temperatures. But comfortable accommodations didn't alleviate the fundamental awkwardness of living in my daughter's home after decades of independence. Small frictions emerged almost immediately, despite everyone's best intentions. Mom, we're having dinner. At 6:30, Sarah would announce, clearly expecting me to join the family meal, which I usually did, grateful for the company and the home-cooked food. I thought I might go to the museum exhibit tonight, I'd reply. There's a new collection of Depression-era photography I've been wanting to see. A flicker of surprise would cross Sarah's face, as if the idea that I might have my own plans hadn't occurred to her. Oh, well, should I keep a plate for you in the refrigerator? These minor negotiations, about meals, about when I might use the main floor laundry facilities, about whether it was necessary to let someone know if I would be home late, reminded me of living with my own mother during the brief period after college when I'd moved back to my childhood home. The reversal of roles was both ironic and mildly irritating. Oddly enough, it was Mark who seemed most comfortable with the arrangement, treating me neither as a guest requiring special accommodation nor as a dependent needing supervision, but simply as another adult sharing the household temporarily. "Eleanor, I'm making coffee. Would you like some?" He'd ask when we encountered each other in the kitchen early mornings before Sarah and the children were awake. "That would be lovely, thank you," I'd reply. And we'd sit companionably at the kitchen island, reading news on our respective devices, occasionally commenting on a headline or sharing an interesting article, but mostly content in silence. These quiet moments revealed a side of my son-in-law I hadn't fully appreciated before, a thoughtfulness that manifested not in grand gestures, but in small considerations. Remembering how I took my coffee, moving his briefcase from the chair. I usually used asking my opinion about a development project he was working on, not out of politeness, but with genuine interest in my perspective. The children adjusted to my presence with different levels of enthusiasm. Jack, at 10, was largely indifferent as long as his routines remained undisturbed, though he did enjoy having an additional audience for his elaborate Lego constructions, and someone willing to play board games on rainy afternoons. Emma, surprisingly, seemed genuinely pleased to have me there. She had claimed a corner of the basement as her photography workspace, complete with a small darkroom setup in what had once been a storage closet. Having me nearby as she developed film and experimented with printing techniques sparked conversations about art, creativity, and the evolution of photography. Topics that clearly engaged her deeply. "Did you ever take pictures? Like as more than just family snapshots?" she asked one evening as she carefully hung newly developed negatives to dry. "I did, actually," I replied, surprised by the question. In college, I studied art history, with a focus on early photography. I spent a semester in Paris visiting all the major photography museums and collections. Emma looked up from her work, eyes widening slightly. "You lived in Paris? You never told me that." I smiled at her. Amazement. "Only for 6 months, but yes, it was one of the most formative experiences of my life." "Did you take pictures while you were there? Do you still have them?" The genuine interest in her voice touched me. When was the last time anyone in my family had asked about my past with such curiosity, had wanted to know who I was before I became wife, mother, grandmother? "I did, and I do," I confirmed. "They're packed away in the storage unit with the rest of my things, but once I'm settled in the new place, I'll find them for you." "That would be amazing," Emma said, returning to her work with renewed focus. After a moment, she added without looking up, "You know, there's a photography course at Wellston that includes a study abroad component in Paris. I'm hoping I can take it sophomore year." The mention of Wellston sent a small tremor of awareness through me. We were approaching a moment of revelation, though the time wasn't quite right yet. Still, I couldn't help testing the waters slightly. "Wellston sounds like a perfect fit for you," I said carefully. "Have your parents mentioned anything about financial arrangements for your tuition?" Emma's hand stilled over her work. "Not really. I mean, I know it's expensive, and they've been having a lot of closed-door conversations about money lately." She glanced at me sideways. "Mom did say something about hoping you might be able to help out, now that you sold the, house." The confirmation that Sarah had discussed this with Emma but not directly with me was both frustrating and oddly liberating. It reinforced my determination to reveal the college funds on my own terms when I was established in my new home and speaking from a position of chosen independence rather than temporary dependence. "Well, we'll see what happens," I said non-committally. "The important thing is that you get to attend the school that's right for you." The weeks passed in this strange limbo. Not quite a guest, not quite a resident, suspended between my former life and the one waiting to begin once my new condominium was ready. Marion called regularly with updates on the closing process, which was proceeding without complications, but at the seemingly glacial pace of real estate transactions. "We're still on track for the 15th, she assured me during our most recent conversation. The sellers have already relocated, so they're as eager as you are to complete the sale. That's good to hear, I said, glancing around the basement suite that, despite my best efforts at personalization, still felt fundamentally temporary. I'm looking forward to getting settled. Have you thought about furniture for the new place? Marian asked. Since you've stored most of your existing pieces, this might be an opportunity to select items that better suit the industrial aesthetic of the building. The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on the logistics of selling one property and purchasing another that I hadn't given much thought to how I would furnish and decorate the new space. My instinct had been to simply use what I already owned, perhaps supplemented with a few new pieces as needed. But Marian's suggestion sparked an unexpected excitement. Why not approach this fresh start comprehensively? The converted factory. Condominium, with its exposed brick walls, large windows, and open floor plan, was so different from my traditional suburban home. Perhaps it deserved furnishings that complemented its unique character, rather than pieces selected for a completely different environment. That's an interesting idea, I said slowly. I hadn't really considered starting from scratch with the furniture. You don't need to replace everything, Marian clarified, but choosing even a few key pieces that reflect the urban industrial style of the building could help the space feel more cohesive and intentional. After we hung up, I found myself browsing furniture websites on my tablet, exploring styles I had never considered before. Sleek sofas with clean lines, dining tables made from reclaimed wood and metal, lighting fixtures that made industrial elements into art. It was a revelation to discover how drawn I was to aesthetics so different from what had surrounded me for decades. I was deep in this exploration when Sarah came downstairs with a laundry basket, stopping short when she saw me studying images of a particular leather sectional sofa. "Are you shopping for furniture?" she asked, setting down the basket. I nodded, turning the tablet so she could see the screen better. "For the new place. What do you think of this style?" Sarah examined the image with evident surprise. "It's very contemporary. Not really what I would have expected you to choose." "That's rather the point," I said mildly. "The condominium has a completely different feel from the house. It seems appropriate to select furnishings that complement that aesthetic." She sat on the edge of the sofa, laundry temporarily forgotten. "You're really embracing this whole new lifestyle, aren't you? First the downtown location, now modern furniture." There was something in her tone, not quite disapproval, but a lingering bewilderment at choices so different from what she had come to expect from me. "I'm enjoying the opportunity to explore different possibilities," I acknowledged. "After so many years of maintaining the status quo, it's refreshing to make active choices rather than simply continuing with what's familiar." Sarah studied me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, when you first started talking about moving, I thought it was some kind of, response to feeling sidelined or ignored, or maybe even early signs of cognitive decline." She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at this admission. "But watching you these past few weeks, I'm starting to think I had it backward." "How so?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "You seem more engaged, more energized than I've seen you in years," she said slowly. "Like you're waking up after a long nap." The observation was surprisingly insightful and not entirely inaccurate. I had been living somewhat on autopilot since James died, maintaining routines and traditions more out of habit than active choice. The changes I was now embracing had indeed awakened something in me. Curiosity, creativity, a willingness to step into unfamiliar territory. "That's an interesting way to put it," I said. "I wouldn't say I was asleep exactly, but perhaps I was. Playing it safe, staying within comfortable boundaries." "And now you're not," Sarah concluded. It wasn't a question. "Now I'm not," I agreed. "And it feels right." She nodded, absorbing this. Then, with a gesture toward the tablet, "For what it's worth, I think that sofa would look great in your new place. The clean lines would complement the industrial elements without competing with them. The casual design advice, offered without judgment or resistance, felt like a small but significant shift in our relationship. An acknowledgement that my choices, while different from what she had expected, were valid on their own terms. "Thank you," I said simply. "I value your opinion." Sarah picked up her laundry basket with a small smile. "Just don't ask me about throw pillows. Mark says I have a problem when it comes to decorative pillows." The moment of connection, brief but genuine, lingered with me as I returned to my furniture browsing with renewed enthusiasm. Perhaps Sarah was beginning to see me not just as her predictable, somewhat old-fashioned mother, but as a person still capable of growth, of change, of surprising choices. 2 days later, I received a text from Marion. "Closing date confirmed for the 15th. Keys will be available that afternoon. Congratulations on your new home." The news sent a surge of anticipation through me. In just over a week, I would be moving into my new space, setting up a home that reflected my current tastes and needs, rather than years of accumulated habits. It was exhilarating, and yes, a little terrifying, like standing at the edge of a high-dive platform, committed to the plunge but still aware of the distance to the water below. That evening at dinner, I shared the news with Sarah's family. "The closing is set for next Friday," I announced as we passed dishes around the table. "I'll be able to start moving in that afternoon." "That's great, Mom," Sarah said with apparent sincerity. "Do you need help with the move? Mark and I could take the day off to help you get settled. I've hired movers for the furniture and larger boxes," I explained. "But I would appreciate help with the smaller items and getting everything arranged. If you're sure you can spare the time?" "Of course," Mark said before Sarah could respond. "We want to see this famous converted factory that's lured you away from suburbia." His teasing tone held genuine warmth, and I found myself unexpectedly moved by their support. Despite the initial resistance and ongoing bewilderment at some of my choices, they were showing up for this transition in tangible ways. "What about me?" Emma asked. "Can I help too? I have a half day at school on Friday for teacher development." "I'd love that," I said, pleased by her interest. "Maybe you could help me decide where to hang artwork and photographs? You have a good eye for composition." Emma beamed at the compliment and the assignment of a specific role. "Definitely. And I want to see where the best light is for photography. Those big windows should be amazing for natural light portraits." "What about me?" Jack piped up, not wanting to be left out. "You, young man, still have a full day of school on Friday," Sarah reminded him. "But maybe you could help Grandma organize her books on the weekend. You're good at alphabetizing." Jack considered this, then nodded, satisfied with his designated task. "I can do that, as long as there's pizza involved." "I think pizza can definitely be arranged," I agreed solemnly, hiding a smile at his transparent negotiation. The conversation shifted to logistics: what time the movers would arrive, what items I needed to purchase for the new place, whether the existing window treatments were adequate or needed replacement. It was ordinary talk about practical matters, yet it felt significant in its normalcy. A family discussing a shared project, each member contributing according to their abilities and interests. As the days counted down to the closing, I found myself increasingly eager to leave the limbo of Sarah's guest suite behind. Living with my daughter's family had provided unexpected opportunities for connection, particularly with Emma, but it had also reinforced my desire for independent space, a place where I could make choices about meals and schedules and furnishings, without navigating others' expectations or preferences. The morning of the closing, I woke early, too excited to sleep. I dressed carefully in an outfit I had specifically saved for this occasion. A tailored blazer in a rich teal, black pants, with a modern cut, silver earrings James had given me for our 25th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman ready to step confidently into a new chapter. Not a stereotypical grandmother in comfortable beige, but someone with her own distinct style and presence. Sarah raised an eyebrow when I appeared in the kitchen. "You look nice. Special occasion?" "Just signing the papers for my new home," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Seemed worth dressing for. She studied me over her own mug, something appreciative in her gaze. "That color is fantastic. On you. It brings out your eyes." The compliment, offered without qualification or surprise, warmed me. "Thank you. It's always been one of my favorites, but I haven't worn it much in recent years." "Why not?" she asked. I considered the question, which was more complex than it appeared. I suppose I fell into certain habits about what was appropriate. At my age and stage of life, neutral colors, conservative cuts, nothing too noticeable. "Well, you should definitely wear more teal," Sarah said decisively. "And whatever other colors make you happy? Life's too short for beige if you don't actually like beige." I laughed, struck by the echo of my own earlier thoughts. Very true. Though there's nothing wrong with beige if that's genuinely your preference. "Absolutely," she agreed. "The point is choice, not specific colors." The exchange, casual as it was, felt meaningful. Another small recognition from Sarah that I was not just an extension of my roles as mother and grandmother, but an individual with my own preferences, my own aesthetic sensibilities, my own right to self-expression. Marion met me at the title company's office at 10 o'clock sharp. Her professional demeanor brightened by evident pleasure at this successful conclusion to our work together. "Ready to become a downtown resident?" she asked as we settled at the conference table. "More than ready," I confirmed, accepting the pen offered by the closing agent. The process was straightforward. A series of signatures and initials on document after document. Formal acknowledgement of the financial and legal aspects of what was, at heart, a deeply personal transition. When the final paper was signed, the closing agent smiled and handed me a set of keys. "Congratulations on your new home," she said warmly. The weight of the keys in my palm made everything suddenly, vividly real. This was happening. I was leaving behind the suburban home where I had raised my family, where I had loved and lost James, where I had gradually learned to live alone, and moving to a completely different environment, one I had chosen specifically for this new stage of my life. Marion drove me to the converted factory building after the closing, chatting about final utility transfers and introducing me to the property manager. The building itself was even more impressive than I remembered from my initial viewing. The restored brick facade retaining its industrial character, while large, newly installed windows softened the effect with their generous light. The lobby featured exposed structural elements juxtaposed with modern furnishings, a perfect blend of historic and contemporary that continued as we rode the elevator to the 4th floor. Walking down the corridor to Unit 412, I felt a flutter of anticipation that reminded me of being a young woman viewing my first apartment. That same mixture of trepidation and excitement about a space that was entirely mine. When Marion unlocked the door and stepped aside to let me enter first, I paused on the threshold, absorbing the reality of what I had purchased. The condominium was currently empty, its potential outlined by soaring ceilings, tall windows with city views, warm brick, walls contrasting with sleek modern fixtures. It was nothing like the house I had just sold, and that was precisely why I had chosen it. A deliberate step into a different aesthetic, a different lifestyle, a different way of experiencing my daily environment. "It's perfect," I said softly, moving further into the space. My footsteps echoed slightly on the polished concrete floors, emphasizing the open layout. Marion smiled, clearly pleased by my reaction. "It really suits you, Eleanor. I know that might sound strange given how different it is from your previous home, but there's something about the blend of historic character and contemporary updates that just feels right for this stage of your journey." The observation was perceptive and affirming. This place did feel right, not despite the dramatic difference from my previous home, but because of it. It represented conscious choice rather than continued habit, active preference rather than passive acceptance. The movers arrived promptly at 1 o'clock, efficiently transporting furniture and boxes from the storage unit where they had been kept during my stay with Sarah. I had been selective about what to bring to the new space, choosing pieces that would complement the industrial aesthetic while providing continuity with my past. My grandmother's rocking chair, James's favorite reading lamp, the coffee table we had purchased on our 20th anniversary. These items would find new contexts here, bridging between memories and fresh beginnings. Sarah, Mark, and Emma arrived shortly after the movers, exclaiming over the space with genuine appreciation. "This is incredible, Mom," Sarah said, turning slowly to take in the high ceilings and exposed ductwork. "Those windows! The natural light is amazing." Mark was examining the kitchen, which featured concrete countertops and sleek, handleless cabinets. "Very high-end finishes," he noted approvingly. "They didn't cut corners on the renovation." Emma had immediately gravitated to the windows, testing how the light fell at different angles. "This is photographer heaven," she declared. "Grandma, you have to let me do a photo shoot here sometime. The textures, the light quality, it's perfect." Their enthusiasm was gratifying, a validation of my choice that I hadn't realized I was seeking until I witnessed it. For all my determination to make decisions based on my own preferences rather than others' expectations, there was still comfort in knowing that those I loved could appreciate and understand what had drawn me to this unconventional space. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity, directing furniture placement, unpacking essential items, arranging kitchen supplies, hanging a few key pieces of artwork. By evening, though many boxes remained to be unpacked, the condominium had begun to take on a lived-in quality, a blend of carefully selected new pieces and meaningful items from my previous home. "I think it's time for that pizza we promised Jack," Mark suggested as we collapsed onto my newly delivered sectional sofa, the one Sarah had approved during our furniture discussion in her basement. "Excellent idea," I agreed, pulling out my phone to place an order. "My treat, as thanks for all your help today." While we waited for the delivery, Emma explored the second bedroom, which I had designated as a combination guest room and office space. "This would make an amazing darkroom," she observed. "There's even plumbing for a sink already installed." "I was thinking you might want to set up some photography equipment here," I admitted. "For when you visit, there's plenty of room for a work table and storage for supplies." Her face lit up with pleasure at the thought that I had considered her interests in planning my space. "Really? That would be awesome. I could leave some basics here so I don't have to transport everything every time." "Exactly," I said, warmed by her enthusiasm. "And perhaps you could teach me a bit about darkroom techniques? I never learned that aspect of photography during my studies." "Definitely. It's actually pretty simple once you understand the basics principles," she assured me, already envisioning the setup with the confidence of someone thoroughly immersed in her craft. The pizza arrived, and we gathered around my new dining table, a rustic piece made from reclaimed wood with an industrial-style metal base, eating directly from the boxes in a casual celebration of the day's accomplishments. "To new beginnings," Mark proposed, raising his water glass in a toast. "And to family helping family navigate change," I added, touching my glass to his. Sarah smiled, her earlier resistance to my move seemingly dissolved in the tangible reality of seeing me settled in a space so clearly suited to my current life. "I have to admit, Mom, I was skeptical about this whole downtown condo idea. But seeing you here..." She gestured expansively at the open living area. The city lights now, visible through the windows as dusk fell. "It fits. It really does." The acknowledgement, freely given and sincere, felt like the final piece clicking into place. Not because I needed Sarah's approval to validate my choice, but because it represented a shift in how she saw me, a willingness to recognize that her mother might have preferences and capacities beyond what she had assumed. As we finished our meal and began cleaning up, I found myself contemplating the next significant revelation awaiting my family: the college funds I had established for Emma and Jack. The time was approaching to share this information. Now that I was settled in my new home and speaking from a position of chosen independence rather than temporary dependence. Looking at Emma, animated as she described her latest photography project to Mark, I felt a surge of anticipation. The funds I had quietly accumulated over years would open doors for her, provide opportunities to pursue her evident passion without the burden of excessive student loans or financial strain on her parents. And revealing their existence would decisively challenge Sarah's perception of me as merely cheap, showing that my modest lifestyle had been a choice guided by specific priorities rather than a failure to understand or appreciate the real cost of living these days. The moment wasn't quite right yet. This evening was about celebrating my move, establishing my new home. But soon, I decided, watching my family relaxed and comfortable in this space I had chosen for myself. Very soon, the moment arrived on a crisp November evening, 6 weeks after I had moved into my condominium. I had invited Sarah, Mark, and the children for dinner, the first formal family meal in my new home, though they had visited several times since moving day. I had spent the afternoon preparing James's famous lasagna recipe, a gesture that felt appropriate for what I planned to share. The dining table was set with care, not with the formal china from my previous home, but with the new stoneware I had selected specifically for this space, earthy colors that complemented the exposed brick walls. A simple arrangement of late autumn flowers served as centerpiece, and through the tall windows, the city lights were beginning to emerge against the darkening sky. Emma arrived first, eager to show me her latest photographs developed in the eye. Partial darkroom setup we had established in my second bedroom. Jack followed, immediately connecting his tablet to my Wi-Fi with the casual entitlement of the digitally native generation. Sarah and Mark appeared last, bearing a bottle of wine, and a bakery box containing my favorite cheesecake. "The place looks amazing, Mom," Sarah said, glancing around approvingly at how the space had evolved since moving day. I had finished unpacking, arranged artwork on the walls, added personal touches that transformed the once empty condominium into a home that reflected both my history and my current aesthetic preferences. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the wine and dessert. "It feels right." Dinner was relaxed, the conversation flowing easily between topics: Emma's photography class, Jack's science project, Mark's latest development proposal, Sarah's upcoming presentation at a regional marketing conference. I found myself observing my family with a curious blend of detachment and deep connection, appreciating who they were as individuals while recognizing the patterns and dynamics that defined us as a unit. As we finished the main course, I poured more wine for the adults and took a steadying breath. Before dessert, there's something I'd like to discuss with all of you. Something in my tone must have signaled the importance of what was coming, because everyone's attention immediately focused on me. Sarah set down her wine glass, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "Is everything okay, Mom?" "Everything is fine," I assured her. "Better than fine, actually. This is good news, but it requires some explanation." I rose and retrieved a folder from the kitchen counter where I had placed it earlier, returning to set it on the table before me. "For the past 10 years, I began, I've been setting aside a portion of my income and savings each month for a specific purpose. I've lived modestly, watched my expenses carefully, and made conservative choices about purchases and activities." Sarah shifted slightly in her seat, and I could almost see the phrase "being cheap" forming in her mind, though she had the grace not to say it aloud. "I did this," I continued, opening the folder, "because I was building college funds for Emma and Jack." The statement hung in the air for a moment before understanding dawned on their faces. Emma was the first to speak. "College funds? Like, for us to go to college?" I nodded, turning the folder so they could see the statements. From Michael's office. These are 529 plans that I established when each of you was quite young. They've been growing steadily, and they're specifically designated for educational expenses. Sarah reached for the papers with hands that trembled slightly. Mom, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us about this? Initially, I wanted it to be a surprise when the time came for Emma to start college, I explained. A gift without expectations or conditions. But then, at Emma's birthday party, I hesitated, uncertain how directly to reference the comment that had sparked this journey. Sarah's face flushed with sudden understanding. When I called you cheap for giving Emma that bracelet, she said quietly. I remember. You overheard us talking in the kitchen. Yes, I acknowledged, grateful for her honesty in naming the moment. It hurt to be perceived that way, especially when the reality was so different. I wasn't hoarding money out of miserliness. I was deliberately setting it aside for something I considered important. Your children's education. Mark had taken the statements and was examining them with professional attention. Eleanor, these balances are substantial. This would cover most of Emma's tuition at Wellston. Possibly all of it, depending on scholarships. That was the intention, I confirmed. To provide options without financial burden. To create opportunity rather than constraint. Emma was staring at me with wide eyes. So I can really go to Wellston without Mom and Dad having to worry about the cost? Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what this means. There was a moment of stunned silence, then Emma launched from her chair and threw her arms around me with teenage exuberance. Grandma, I can't even thank you. Jack, though less immediately affected since college was still years away for him, understood enough to recognize the significance. Does this mean I can go to any college too? Even expensive ones? Within reason, I said, smiling at his practical question. Your fund is still growing, but yes, it will provide similar opportunities when your time comes. Sarah was still holding the statements, her expression a complex mixture of emotions, surprise, gratitude, and something that looked like remorse. All these years, she said softly. All these years I assumed I was being unnecessarily frugal, I completed for her. That I didn't understand the real cost of living, as you put it once. She winced slightly at hearing her own words reflected back. I was wrong, she admitted. So wrong about your priorities, your choices. We all make assumptions based on what we observe, I said, not unkindly. You saw the surface, modest spending, careful budgeting, without understanding the purpose behind it. Mark reached across the table to squeeze my hand. This is an incredible gift, Eleanor. Not just the money itself, but the forethought. The years of consistent saving. It was something I could do, I said simply. Something that mattered to me. Helping secure educational opportunities for my grandchildren without burdening their parents financially. Sarah finally set down the statements and met my eyes directly. I owe you an apology, Mom, not just for what I said at Emma's party, but for how I've been seeing you, or not seeing you, for a long time now. The acknowledgement, freely offered without defensiveness, touched me deeply. We've both been learning to see each other more clearly. These past few months, I observed. This change, my move, this new chapter, it's created space for that, I think. Emma, who had returned to her seat but was practically vibrating with excitement, suddenly frowned thoughtfully. But Grandma, if you were saving so much for our college funds, why the big change with selling the house and moving here? You could have kept living the same way. It was an insightful question, revealing more perception than I had given my granddaughter credit for. Because after that moment at your birthday party, I explained, I realized something important. I had been defining myself too narrowly, limiting my choices based on what I thought was expected of me as a widow, a mother, a grandmother. I decided it was time to reclaim some aspects of myself that had been set aside: my own preferences, my desire for new experiences, my capacity for change. So this condo, the new furniture, everything, it's not just about practicality, Sarah said. Zoe, it's about self-definition. Exactly, I confirmed, pleased by her understanding. It's about actively choosing who I want to be at this stage of life, rather than passively accepting others' assumptions about who I should be. As the conversation continued, and we eventually moved to dessert, I felt a profound sense of alignment, as if disparate pieces of my life had finally clicked into place. The revelation of the college funds had not only challenged Sarah's perception of me as cheap, but had opened a broader dialogue about seeing each other more completely, with fewer preconceptions and greater curiosity. Looking around my dining table, at Emma already dreaming aloud about photography courses at Wellston, at Jack calculating how much his fund might grow before he reached college age, at Mark refilling wine glasses with a generous hand, at Sarah watching me with new understanding in her eyes, I felt something that had been missing for too long: the joy of being fully seen, not just for what I could provide or represent to others, but for who I was in my entirety, with all my complexities, priorities, and capacity for surprising choices. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.